In this video, I'll be walking you through exactly how I will prepare if I am to write JAMB 2020. I want you to imagine that you are in charge of building a house and a storm is about approaching. What do? Do you try as much as possible to finish completing the house that you are building, or you try as much as possible to finish just a room, just a small space that you can fit yourself in for the meantime for the storm to pass? This is exactly what it means in this video, and the strategies that I will be sharing. They are strategies to provide you that small space that you can get yourself in for the storm to pass. More importantly, to get the best out of this small time period that we have left in preparation for JAMB 2024. The very first step we will be taking is what I like to call the collection stage. And there are two sub-stages in this collection stage. The very first sub-stage is to take a CBT practice test. A CBT practice test like the way you would be writing the JAMB exams. That is 100 questions, 4 subjects, 2 hours. I implore and beg of you that you write it exactly the same way that you will be writing the exam. Meaning you don't have access to the internet, you don't have access to past questions to check if you are correct for your answer. And I also implore of you that you should not guess. The purpose of this CBT exam that we're taking, or this CBT practice test that we're taking, is to find out our knowledge gaps. Because those knowledge gaps, I will be sharing how we are going to fill them as we progress in this 8 days marathon preparation. The second sub-stage that we will be talking about is through the use of the JAMB Remix preparation textbook. Based on your subject configuration, for example, if you're writing physics, chemistry, biology, English, or you're writing mathematics as substitute to biology, based on your subject's configuration, I want you to get the JAMB Remix textbook. And what I want you to do for me is this. All the topics in the JAMB Remix textbook, write them out in a sheet of paper and write out the number of questions that are in the JAMB Remix. So when you have written them out, I want you to categorize them based on the highest topic with the most numbers of questions and the lowest topic in terms of the numbers of questions and the middle point. So when you have done that, the next thing you are going to do is to go back to the CBT practice test that you have taken, and you are to check through all the questions that you missed. When you have checked through all the topics or all the questions that you have missed, what I want you to do is try as much as possible to try and find out where did these questions come from? What topics did they come from? And that should be your knowledge gap. Those are the concepts that you have not understood or you have not gone through before. Now that you have those two forms of data, we are going to come up with what I like to call an HYPER CRAM list. And this is the way you are going to do it. You have the questions that you have filled. You have been able to find out which topics they came from. You have your JAMB Remix and the topics classification based on high yield topics in terms of numbers, medium yield topics in terms of numbers, and low yield topics in terms of numbers. So what you are going to do for me is this. Those topics that are high yield, write them out. And those topics that you fill in the CBT exams, those questions you fill and the topics they came from, write them out as well. That is your HYPER CRAM list for that particular subject. And that is what you are meant to go through. And after you are done with that, you can then start talking about the medium yield topics or the lower yield topics. We are trying as much as possible to hit those points in the exams that is always a sure banker that there would be questions from them. That's the purpose of this first day. So take your time for the first day and get this done. On the second day, the next thing we want to do is to start our cramming process. And I'm going to share with you a more efficient way of cramming, because the way that most people talk about cramming is this: we try as much as possible to take in a lot of information, and when we try as much as possible to take in a lot of information, it's always assured that a lot of that information is forgotten. Why? Because any information that lacks, I talked about this in the last video, you can check the description for the link to the last video. Any information that doesn't have any form of solid connection between neurons, which means it's not connected to my previous knowledge, and this new information that I'm taking in, it cannot stick. So the way that people cram would make sure that we are taking in a lot of information, but also forgetting a lot of it, essentially because of the time period towards the exam. So the strategy I'm going to talk about doesn't talk about memorization for now, because your aim is to find out those topics and keep them in such a way that it is not forgotten. Another video on memorization will be recorded in a short time from now. So please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified anytime those videos drop. To start our HYPER CRAM process, the very first thing we need to do is to lay the foundation. And how do we lay the foundation? For example, you have gone through the first day and you identify that you still lack a major understanding in waves. The very first step you have to do is this: go to the end of the chapter and look at the summary. When you look at the summary, does that summary give you a proper knowledge of the concept? Does it give you all that you need to know about the concept? If it does, you don't need to go through the chapter again. But if there are still some gaps and or it's not logical enough for understanding, then you can go through the chapters. And as you are going through the summary, or you are going through the chapters, if the summary doesn't provide what you need, you are identifying the key concepts. And I know that you have heard a lot about key concepts, because every topic has a concept or the building block that every other information is placed upon. And how do you know the key concept? A key concept is any piece of information that affects understanding of all the information in that chapters or other informations to come. For example, waves. Understanding the structure and the type of waves will help me understand when I get to sound waves or I get to light waves, for example. That is what I'm talking about. So the key concept in waves is understanding the types of waves, amplitude, and other concepts like that. To get them into your brain by forming a logic about them. You don't cram what amplitude is, or you don't cram what transverse waves is or longitudinal waves is. You try as much as possible to form connections between those things. For example, the questions you should be asking is, what makes this concept A and concept B different? What makes it similar? For example, transverse waves is different from longitudinal waves. Why? What of this concept makes them similar? And these are the type of thought processes that you should be going through when you are trying to put those concepts into your brain. Another very good example that I have that I like to share is when it comes to blood vessels. A lot of students come to blood vessels and try as much as possible to cram all the characteristics of arteries and cram all the characteristics of veins, cram all the characteristics of capillaries. But if you are trying to understand the true concept of blood vessels, you are trying to understand what type of blood flows through those blood vessels. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? You are understanding the underlying foundational principles and not cramming the characteristics. So based on the type of blood that flows through each of those vessels, you can be able to guess the characteristics of those vessels. You might not necessarily know all characteristics, but understanding the underlying principles in the blood vessels can give you an opportunity to guess. Now, in this HYPER CRAM process, be assured that some part of this information would be forgotten. But you want to understand the key concept to provide what I like to call calculated guesses. A calculated guess is something that I do when I don't know the answer, but I have an idea of the underlying principle. The next thing we have to do is to go through our learning objectives. And this is where most students ignore. The learning objectives comes in two folds. The learning objectives comes in the light of your textbook and also in the light of the syllabus you were given. Examiners are always going to test you according to the learning objectives. You want to keep only that which is required of you for the JAMB exam. And that is gotten through the learning objectives from the syllabus and also from the textbooks. This hypercram process will run for the next 3 to 4 days. 3 to 4 days, run this hypercram process for all subjects and based on your configuration for JAMB. In each of these days, please continue with the CBT practice test and also mine those concepts or those topics that you failed to fill in back for the hypercram process. Now, after these days is over, the next thing we want to do is to start filling the tiny little details. And this should last you about a day. So if you started on the first day, which is the collection stage, 3 days, the hypercram process, the next day is to fill in the tiny little details of the concept. And these are tiny little details like what type of acid is found in the stomach, what are the various characteristics of waves, and the tiny details that are not found in the concepts. The way to do this is to turn those tiny details into flashcards, because those tiny details can be tested, but the frequency of them being tested is not that much, and you don't want to be concentrating on that during this hypercram process. Also, I would give you a bonus tip that will ensure that you have the best time possible in preparation. The bonus tip I would give you is to set a timer whenever you are going for your cramming session. Preferably use the Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes for work and 5 minutes for break. What this does is to increase the sense of urgency because you know time is going through, and also there are new studies showing forth in the neuroscience and in the learning science that our brain remembers what is recent and forgets all that is far above. So using the Pomodoro technique ensures that there is urgency and also ensures that there is a lot of recency when we are going through an information.